and welcome. I'm Alex from Unflow, and I'm the head of mobile over here. What we're going to look at today is an example of how you can enhance your app by adding a messaging center straight into your app, which uses live content from the web. If you click demo here, this is what we're going to build, a nice message center. You see, got two pieces of content here, and these are being driven from our web editor over here. Now, the way we're going to do this is we're going to create something called a space. A space in Unflow is a place where your content can live. So this could be a physical space in your app, or it could just be a neat, nice way to organize your content. If we look over here on our dashboard, we can hit spaces and tap plus and then create one. In this case, I'm making a message center. So I'm going to call it message center and I pick how I want it to look. Now we're going to build some custom UI. So this doesn't actually matter. Normally I'd recommend the simple, just because it looks quite nice with a nice banner interface, or alternatively, you can use a visual interface for like a big image. But because I've already created one, I'm not going to hit create just there. I'm just going to go straight into the one I've already made here. Now, in our message center, we have some screens that are already live. We can hit edit to change that style we just looked at, so banner and visual. And we can also look at deleting it or adding it to our app. We get a piece of code that we can throw straight in. We're going to come back to this in a sec. But that center is ready to go, and we have some content here. Now, you won't have content here because you'll be starting from scratch. So what we're going to do for you is add some content, and we're just going to use a gallery here. So one of the really common things you want in one of these message centers is like a new product update. So let's hit product update. Give it a second. And what we're going to see is we get our content ready to go. So we get this text and description here. Now, again, we're going to build some custom UI. But here what we have is this is the image, the title and description that's going to be sent down to the app to be displayed. We can see that we're displaying it in our message center space. And then we have a couple of other options. We're not going to use these today, but I figured it's worth having a quick look at what these do anyway. First of all, you can show the user the screen as soon as they match. So what this means is, as soon as this user is eligible to see this screen, they'll see it as a pop-up instead of having to tap on it. So for messages, this might be really useful. Say if you've got a brand new feature, you might want to really get it into the user's faces. So you want to enable this so they open the app, it pops up, and then it goes away, and then it will also be in their message center. You can also send a push. So again, with messages, this can be great. So you might want to send a push, get them to open it, and then again, once they've closed it, it will still be sat in the message center if they want to go back to it. You can also edit the audience. So you notice I said match earlier. Match generically means how we decide to show a user content. If you have no rules, everyone matches it. So every user will match that screen one time, and then after that, it will just show up in the space on its own, but it won't pop up again. What we're going to do in this instance is not actually set any audience, but what you could do is you could set the audience to say new users. So say if you have this feature that we're adding today. So this is just a what's new where we're going to walk people through some audio spaces, for example. What you could do is you could set the audience for people who haven't opened the audio space screen. And then that means everyone who joins the app in future will also match this onboarding content. So it's a great way to not only onboard people when things are new, but also onboard people to these features in the future without having to build a new screen for it. But again, we're going to leave it alone today, and we're just going to leave this as is and go to our content. Now, the content we have here is pre-made. We're not really going to change it, but what we can see is we have a nice carousel. We can change a bunch of content, so change how it displays. We want modals, sheets. Do we want the paginator to be at the top or the bottom? We can change the text for next and done buttons, so this button down at the bottom. And then we can change the styles. I generally think this is quite nice as is. So introducing audio rooms, smart noise cancellation, and then finally, same again, just a little bit more info. Now, this screen has these buttons on its own. So what will happen is you press next, and then you press done, and it goes away. If you want, you could add a footer button here. So for example, on this last page, it might be really useful to add a footer button, call it let's try it, and then call this something like cool app, new feature. So some kind of a deep link here, which would be really cool, like so. And we even have an example for you there. We're not going to set that up today because we're just using a simple example, but that's just to let you know kind of how far you can go with this. Now, if you're a premium subscriber to Unflow, you could also run content variation on this. So you see here I have 1, 2, and 3. What you might want to do is maybe shrink this down. So a really good example of content variation for onboarding is to have page 1, 2, and 3 as your kind of starter carousel. And then maybe you try doing a version where you don't actually have 3 pages, you just have one. It has like a really like cool succinct intro and then a button to launch straight into the feature. That's another way to do it, and you might want to try that. And you'd see those results for that page up there. Now, we're going to set this content live. So once we set our content live, what we're going to do is make sure we have our app ready to go, and we should see that content. Here, I've got a fresh run of the app. If I go into here, I can see my content is already sat there waiting for me. Now, this isn't just for free. The content coming down, we handle for you, but the actual message center, you do have to build yourself. But luckily, we're going to walk you through that entire process now. So, inside your app, inside the top level, you're going to want to make sure you've initialized Unflow and you set a user ID. So in this case, what I've done here is I've initialized it. I provided my key. You'll have to provide your own here, of course. And then you have to set your user ID, call sync, and then inside your content view, you're going to want to make sure that you sync at appropriate times. So in this instance, what I'm doing is whenever the app goes from background to foreground, I'm calling sync. So this makes sure with reasonable intervals, the user sees new content. You might also want to periodically sync on certain pages. So what we're going to do next is look at our messages manager. Now, message manager, it looks like there's a lot going on here, but it's just because there's a lot of stored properties. There's not actually that much code going on. So what we have is a really basic object, which is observable, which publishes an array of messages. It has some internal stuff going on, but the important part is that it publishes a bunch of messages. We give it an Unflow SDK reference and a reference to user default, so we store those, and then we fetch our openers from Unflow. Now, we saw this method earlier on when we were on the dashboard, Unflow client.openers, and then we provide it with an ID. Now, this ID is from the dashboard. If we go into the dashboard again and we go to our space, message center, we hit edit and add to app, we see this code in here and we can copy it if we want to, and we can just copy the ID. In here, I just wrapped it up in a nice constant. If you go down to the bottom, message center, but you could feel free to just put a string in there if you'd like. Then, once you've got the openers, you get a stream of these. So these update live. So every time you sync, every time an event gets fired, these will update if they need to. So what we're going to do inside here is reload the states of the openers. We'll take a look at that function in a little second. We store the openers. We want to store these so that we have a reference to the entire list without being filtered, and then we handle those later on. And then we finally want to map them into a custom object, and then hop back onto the main thread just because we're about to update some UI, and then store the messages. We've got some user interaction going on. So for our user defaults, we saw that we had seen openers and deleted openers. What we're going to do is maintain a local array of seen openers and deleted openers, and then we're going to store those arrays in user defaults so that when the app next opens, we have access to those. And then once someone's marked something as seen or deleted, we fire off a task to refresh our messages. And all we do in our refresh messages is we make sure we're on main, and then we map our openers again. We'll take a look at our mapped openers function in just a sec. We have a reload opener states function. So all this does is make sure we reload the latest stuff from user defaults. In theory, this should only ever be updated from inside this class, but you never know, something might go wrong. Or maybe you're using something where these defaults are backed from the web. And if they are backed from the web, then what you're going to want to do is make sure you fire this at reasonable intervals or when you get like a sync message from your own server. Finally, our map openers function. This kind of handles all the magic for us. We filter out the deleted openers and then we map them to a fancy object called message, which gets provided an opener and it gets told whether or not it's been seen. Now, our message object is just a wraparound opener with a boolean, which is nice and simple. And what we need to do with this is make a way to display these messages. So we're going to make a way to display these messages, find a place for that to live, and then find a way to present that. And it's only going to take us a couple of small files, and we're going to get this little guy to show up here. So if we go on message row view, we're going to find that we provide it with a message, and we just have a really simple view here. So we have an image which gets squished and sort of reshaped, and a nice clip to make it all rounded, which is the one we can see here. Now we can see how our message gets provided data to. So our opener will give us an image URL, which is optional. Here you might want to fall back to something inside your app. So you might have like a brand image or an app icon that you might want to provide instead, and it'll fetch that from the web. You'll also get a title and a subtitle. Now again, the subtitle is optional. I just fold back to an empty string, but if you want, you could put a space in there or just remove this entirely if a subtitle isn't present. But the title will always be there. And then finally, I've animated the message being seen or not. And then here what I do is I set the list row background depending on whether or not it's been seen. You can see here I just have a leftover from when we were testing. So let's change this over to something appropriate. So let's say we want to set this to system background with like a low opacity. So what this will mean is that if this is in a list, the color will change to a low opacity background color, which is kind of like a white. If it's been seen, or if it's not been seen, we'll get the full white color, which is quite nice. And we're going to animate that when that changes. If we look at this over here, we can see that the content does look quite nice when we change dark modes and stuff too. So we're also going to need a place for this to live, so our message center itself. Now our message center is nice and simple because all the logic is contained in a messages manager that kind of acts like a view model in this instance. So all we're going to do is make a list. We're going to iterate over the messages, make sure we use the opener's ID to make them unique, and then put them in a button. And then inside a button, for the action, we're going to open screen when it gets tapped using the opener's ID, which we get provided from our message, and then mark it as seen when it's been tapped. So again, just mark a scene with message.opener's.id. And then for our label, we just have our message row view, which we just looked at. Now, I did just set this up inside my message row view, but because of a SwiftUI complication around labels can't set the list row background because they're inside the button, we also have to do it out here. And you could choose to animate this as well if you wanted to, but I like to keep the animations sort of tucked away inside the message row view. We also have our swipe actions, which again, nothing too custom. All we've got is some standard images with some nice font set so that they look pretty. And then we just call markers deleted or markers seen, depending on what the button does. So these are these buttons here. So markers seen, and then markers deleted, like so. And it all animates for free just because we're using a list. Now, finally, we do need a way to show this. So in my example, I have a little button with a red dot. So if I go to my message center button over here, this again is super simple just because it wraps around a messages manager. So this gets provided with a message manager. I have a computed variable to work out, okay, do I have some messages and then do I have some that I haven't seen yet? You could expand this if you wanted to, so you might also have a thing to check, okay, are there any messages at all? If so, let's just hide this button. But in our instance, all we do is we check if there are some unseen messages. And then we use that to determine whether or not we should show like a little red icon on the bell. Otherwise, we just show the generic system bell image. You could use something custom here if you wanted to, but I think the iOS one is quite common and quite nice. We just show that if there are messages, and we show the dot, and then we animate that too, and then we use a callback in the button. The reason we use a callback in here rather than just like showing a sheet generically is that this should be reusable. So the rest of our app is empty for now just because it's a demo app. But in your app, you might have a bunch of different places where it might be appropriate to put this. So they might have a home page, you might have a profile page, and so on. So you might want more places to put this button. So it's important to make sure that you can reuse that. And finally, we're going to look at how we actually use this button. So in my home view, if I scroll down, you can see I've added a toolbar. So up here, I've placed it in the navigation bar trailing spot, and then I've just used my button where all I do is pass it to message manager and then set a boolean to true once it's been tapped. And then all I have here is a sheet where I do if show messages is true, show the message center wrapped inside a navigation view, which you've already seen. So if I go in here, I can see my content, I can tap this, I see it, I can go through here, it looks super nice, I close it, it's been marked as seen, I close this, and I have no red dot anymore. So that was it. That's all we need to do, and that's a fully functional message manager ready to go. And you could put this in your app today. It's not very much to do. It's a couple of small files, and you'd be good to go. All you need to make sure you have an Unflow account, and there you have it. You could go a bit further, like we said. So you could look at A/B testing. You could look at maybe customizing it to you a bit. So this is really simple for now. You're using an Apple list, but you could go further with like custom cards, display. You might want to maybe even potentially use one of these fields to treat it like a data field. So you might just want a title, and then you might sneak some data in the subtitle or something. Entirely up to you. But that's all we need to do, and I'll leave that with you. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. We do have a live chat on the documentation site. You can also email us, or you can sign up on our website to learn a little more. Thanks.